Am I the a-hole for keeping an inheritance that came from my ex-husband's family who were against his sexuality? I'm a 33-year-old woman and I married my childhood best friend, John, who was also 33 when we were 22. We both knew he was gay, but we decided to get married for various reasons, like tax benefits and convenience, and to keep his family from discovering the truth. I had a good relationship with his family, who genuinely cared for me. John's family financially supported us both, especially during his medical school years while I didn't have a job. Instead, I took on the role of a full-time caregiver for his grandparents, who were 85 and 87 years old and dealing with multiple health issues when we first got married. John's family continued to provide financial support as he pursued his medical degree. 3 years ago, John came out to his parents, and we ended our marriage. However, we chose not to disclose that I had known about his sexuality all along. His parents completely cut ties with him when he moved in with his boyfriend, essentially disowning him. We decided not to inform his grandparents about his sexuality, considering their fragile physical and mental state. Although John's visits with his grandparents became less frequent after the divorce due to his strained relationship with his family, I continued to care for them. On the other hand, I had dedicated so much time to being the primary caregiver for his grandparents that, firstly, I lacked training for another career to support myself. Number two, thought it made sense for me to continue caring for them, especially since their health was rapidly deteriorating and I didn't want them to struggle with too many changes. So, I moved into their grandparents' home with them, all while I was upset with how John's parents had treated him. However, I still had a deep affection for his grandparents, who had always been kind to me. Unfortunately, they both passed away within a few weeks of each other. Surprisingly, his grandfather left most of their entire estate to me, which amounted to about $12 million in assets. John and his mother each received around $50,000. John and I had a conversation about it, and we both believed it was fair for him to receive a larger share. We were content and satisfied with the way we divided the inheritance. On the contrary, his parents had expected to receive the majority of the inheritance and accused me of mistreating his grandparents and manipulating them into leaving almost everything to me. They had assumed they would be the beneficiaries of the estate. They also argued that they would have been furious if they had known John was using their money to, as they put it, fund his lifestyle. Honestly, I hadn't even considered their will when his grandparents passed away. It never crossed my mind. But I firmly believe John deserves this money, especially given how poorly his parents treated him. John also tells me that I deserve to be taken care of, considering I spent over a decade caring for his grandparents. Are we in the wrong for keeping the inheritance, especially when his parents had made plans based on their assumptions about it? In my opinion, I don't think I'm at fault in this situation. I came across a comment that expresses a viewpoint I agree with. The comment goes like this: even if John's parents were decent people, OP spent a decade caring for them and deserves whatever they felt was right to give her, which in this case, I agree with. She devoted her 20s to them and was there until the end. That's more than what John's mother can say she did for them in the last 10 years. Story 2. I'm a 40-year-old married father with one child. In 2020, my mom passed away unexpectedly, leaving her retirement accounts and cash proceeds from a house to me as the beneficiary, totaling around $650,000. My wife and I are financially stable, with good jobs in our own home. I hired a lawyer to handle the probate process because I had no knowledge of her end-of-life plans, and there was no explicit will. While we had discussed end-of-life matters, I was very uncomfortable talking about it with her because I didn't want to think about her passing. As I navigated through the probate process, I discovered that she had accounts, but I couldn't access them until the courts officially declared me as the family representative. I assumed that the probate process would divide our mother's assets equally among my brothers and me. To avoid any suspicion of wrongdoing, I openly shared with my brothers the total amount of assets our mom had. However, when the courts appointed me as the family representative, I discovered that all of our mother's money had been designated to go to me, leaving nothing for my brothers. On paper, my middle brother had distanced himself from our mom for 12 years due to his anger over her struggles with alcoholism. I had made efforts to reconcile them, but it proved fruitless. Our mom was stubborn and didn't take kindly to being confronted about her drinking problem. My brother resented what he perceived as missed opportunities in his 20s because of his strained relationship with our mom. My relationship with this brother has always been shaky because he consistently mishandles his six-figure income and frequently borrows money from me. When our mom passed away, I gave him her car, which was valued at $10,000, along with $10,000 in cash in 2021 and another $10,000 in cash in 2022. However, he's facing financial troubles again despite my attempts to assist him, and he strongly resents me for managing our mother's finances. I suspect that he either has a severe gambling problem or is misusing his prescription ADHD medication. My youngest brother has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, but he's living independently, although he frequently stops taking his prescribed medications. His finances are overseen by a fiduciary. He's a disabled former veteran, and his entire living expenses are covered by a settlement he received from the Army, along with his disability check. I personally provided him with $10,000 through his fiduciary, but I haven't maintained much contact with him due to his unstable behavior. When he's taking his prescribed medication, he manages reasonably well. However, he consistently mishandles his weekly allowance and often clashes with his fiduciary. He also uses illegal drugs, and for a whole year he refused to even buy groceries for himself. Every Friday he receives a cash allowance of $150 from the fiduciary, only to gamble it all away on the same day. I'm concerned that if he were to receive a lump sum of money, it could lead to dire consequences, including his potential demise. My brother certainly believes I'm in the wrong. I'm trying to respect our mom's wishes and safeguard this significant windfall, which would likely be squandered at the casino or on drugs. I don't believe I'm at fault here. Story 3. My husband Jack and I tied the knot later in life, both of us being in our 50s. It was a second marriage for both of us. Jack has 3 children, while I don't have any biological children of my own. Nevertheless, I have a strong bond with my former stepson Thomas, whom I helped raise. We were both financially well off, with Jack being more affluent than me. Jack was the owner of his own business and made it clear that he intended to pass the business on to his children. Before our wedding, we signed a prenuptial agreement that essentially stated we'd each retain what we brought into the marriage. Although we maintained separate finances, we both contributed to a joint account dedicated to covering household expenses, which we split evenly. Around the same time, we also created our wills. Jack decided to leave his assets to his children, while I chose to leave mine to Thomas. We were both aware of each other's decisions and were comfortable with them. However, Jack's business suffered a significant setback about 4 years ago. He desperately tried to save it and invested most of his savings. But unfortunately, he ended up losing nearly everything. This was a devastating blow to him. In terms of our living standards, not much changed, except that I started covering 100% of our household expenses. I love Jack, and I'm perfectly fine with this arrangement. Recently, I had a health scare which made me realize that if I were to pass away, Jack would be left with nothing, since my will currently leaves everything to Thomas. I discussed with Jack my intention to update my will. My plan was to set aside a third of my assets in a trust for Thomas's children. There are 3 parts to how I plan to distribute my assets. 1/3 directly to Thomas, 1/3 in a trust for Jack, and the remaining 1/3 going to Jack as a generous monthly stipend. However, upon Jack's passing, the assets held in the trust would ultimately pass on to Thomas. This arrangement is because I want to ensure Jack's well-being while he's alive, but my priority after his passing is for the assets to benefit Thomas, not Jack's children. Jack is extremely upset that his children won't receive anything from my estate. He repeatedly emphasizes that I have 3 stepchildren, not just 1. He questions why his kids are being excluded while Thomas receives everything. It's important to note that when Jack and I got together, his children were already grown, with one of them having their own child and another being married. Aside from occasional holidays, I haven't lived with Jack's children. Biologically, he's not the father of Thomas, but I consider Thomas my son in every meaningful way. While I have a cordial relationship with Jack's children, we aren't particularly close. Jack is now threatening to leave me over this issue, claiming that my decision reflects a lack of care for his kids and, by extension, for him. I've expressed that I disagree with this interpretation and that I don't respond well to ultimatums. It's worth noting that we had originally planned to keep our assets separate even before we got married. However, now that Jack is facing financial difficulties, he's suddenly insisting that I leave my money to his children. I'm unsure if I'm in the wrong for not wanting to make this change. And I believe this one has to be a not the a-hole situation because they initially agreed to keep their expenses separate, which essentially confirms their decision. However, please feel free to share your perspective if you disagree with me or have a different viewpoint. I'd appreciate hearing your opinion. Story 4. We still have one more story to cover in today's video. I hope everyone is enjoying this and having a wonderful day. Let's move on to the final story. Recently, my wife's best friend Vanessa and her husband James were convicted of a serious fraud and are awaiting sentencing in a couple of weeks. It's possible that as part of their sentence, they may lose many of the items they purchased with the illegal money, including their cars, some artwork, and Vanessa's extensive collection of expensive clothing. Vanessa, in particular, is reluctant to part with her wardrobe. Given my profession in construction, I own a van. Vanessa has asked my wife if we could borrow my van to transport her clothes to a remote storage location. She wants me to drive the van and store her clothing there. Their rationale is that while the police might trace their cars, they won't be able to retain those, but Vanessa is unwilling to part with her clothing collection. Vanessa's clothing collection is untraceable, so they believe they can keep it without any issues. Vanessa's intention is to retain her clothes for when she's released from prison. I informed my wife that I couldn't participate in something that might lead to both of us getting arrested. She argued that the clothes are not being monitored and the chances of the police pursuing us are minimal. In response, she accused me of being unkind for refusing to assist a woman facing years in prison. However, I don't consider my stance as unkind at all. Regardless of the size of the risk, it's still a risk. My wife and I have jobs and 2 children to support. And any trouble with the police could have devastating consequences for our lives. Am I in the wrong here?